It's almost time for kickoff in week 3 as the Seahawks look to improve to 3-0 for the first time since the 2020 season. What do they need to do to beat the Miami Dolphins, and who's going to be active for them to have a chance to get that third straight win? We're going to be taking a deep dive here on our latest Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on Blue Friday by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in nearby Gig Harbor, Washington, or if you're over in Washington, D.C., we greatly appreciate each and every one of you making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. It is Blue Friday, which means it's time to get the game plans out for a Seahawks victory. We've got picks to click, we've got game predictions, and of course, the final injury report, which is a bit longer than I think most fans would like, but we are now entrenched in the middle of the season. This is what happens. Guys get banged up. So we will update those injuries coming up here shortly on a jam-packed Blue Friday episode. It is brought your way by our friends at PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedInNFL and use the code all lowercase LockedInNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Now for your lead story here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. After not practicing at all again for a second straight week, fantasy owners and Seahawk fans alike are going to be pretty bummed because it is not looking good for Ken Walker III to play on Sunday against the Miami Dolphins. He did have a helmet and cleats on today, but Mike Macdonald said not looking great for his chances to play, and he has been listed with a designation of doubtful for Sunday. George Fant is out as well. He was relegated from doubtful to out midway through the day today, Nick. Not a lot of surprises necessarily. It didn't look good with the Seahawks signing another running back to their practice squad for Ken Walker III to play in this football game. George Holani, by the way, apparently now has an ankle injury. So this is a banged-up backfield, and it's a banged-up offensive line getting ready to face the Miami Dolphins. But I guess if you're looking for good news, boy, Mafe is trending in the right direction.
Yeah, unfortunately, let's start with the bad news. Being down Ken Walker III most likely and George Fant definitely certainly will not help the run game, which already is struggling 25th in yards per attempt in the NFL. The run game has really struggled, and we saw that a lot against New England. They really had a hard time getting going. Luckily, the pass game was working. Give a lot of credit to Ryan Grubb, Geno Smith and company for kind of scheming around a lackluster run game. Unfortunately, that might be much of the same here. We'll talk about what that might look like later on in the show. But being down George Fant for another game is a real bummer. Stone Forsythe has been okay in his absence, but not necessarily certainly a proactive a huge part of this offense. And actually, I was very interested just reading, what the Seahawks did with the run game last week in George Fant's absence. If I'm reading this right, Corbin, they did not attempt a single rush to the right side of the offensive line last week. So they completely game planned around perhaps not rushing towards Stone Forsythe's side last week. Unfortunately, that might be much of the same this week. And again, a different defense, perhaps not quite as stout of a defense in some ways, but I'm also not loving Jerome Baker being maybe out as well. Just he's been a solid linebacker. I was way down in the linebacker room. Jerome Baker and Terrell Dodson have both been fantastic so far for the most part, especially in coverage. And I would really, this is one of the biggest surprises perhaps today is Derek Hall. I would really hate for him to miss this game. He popped up late in the week. He's tied for third on the team in pressures. He's had kind of a resurgent season, kind of this year's Boye Mafe, if you will. Just kind of coming on in year 2. And so I would really hate for him to miss this game. I don't like that he's all of a sudden popped up.
Yeah, really the question marks are on the defensive side of the football when we're talking about this injury report. Because again, we talked about it on Wednesday's show. Didn't look like it was trending in the right direction for Ken Walker III to be back. Now, if you want some good news on that front, Mike Macdonald sounded optimistic that Ken Walker III would be ready for week 4 against the Detroit Lions, which certainly will be a game where you're hoping you can run the ball in part to keep the ball away from the Detroit offense. they have done putting up points the last couple of years with that offense. But Ken Walker III's not going to be available in this game. It was already leaning that way. Offensively, they may have Pharaoh Brown making his debut, which would certainly help the tight end group. That's going to help the run blocking department in that accord, because they have certainly missed his run blocking at the tight end position. It allows you to have Noah Fant be more of that move tight end that he is built to be, and maybe that will lead to some production. But defense is where the questions are really at. Now, Boye Mafe, he bruised his knee at the tail end of Sunday's win over the Patriots. It looked like it was a non-contact injury, which initially scared me. But from my understanding is he banged his knee the play before, and he was just having a really hard time moving around on the following snap. So it sounds like he is trending in the right direction to play. And thank goodness, because you're going to be without a Uchenna Nwosu. That was not a surprise either. Maybe he's back next week. But Derek Hall being that late addition, and I've found over the years covering the NFL, this is not a given, but a lot of times when guys are added to an injury report on Friday, that is usually not a good omen if they're a late addition after the initial injury report comes out. Now, this could just be a case where, okay, he's got a hip injury, we need to report this. That could very well be the situation to make sure they're in compliance with league rules, but adding him late like that does not necessarily bode well usually. So Seattle can't afford to not have him and Nwosu in this game. That would put a lot of stress on Trevis Gibson to play a lot of snaps. Maybe Tyus Bowser becomes a practice squad elevation to play in Mike McDonald's defense again after playing for him in Baltimore for a while. But the question marks are the edge group and then linebacker with Jerome Baker. This means Tyrese Knight, from my understanding, he's starting on Sunday against the Miami Dolphins. So it's going to be his first career start. And what a draw you get when you got to deal with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle running crossers across the middle of the field. And you may have to pick them up in zone coverage, or dealing with Devin Achane coming out of the backfield with his ability to create as a pass catcher. Not necessarily the greatest draw. You do have it against a backup quarterback, but look, I thought Tyrese Knight played well last week in his first extended action. Now we get to see what he looks like as a starter. I'll be stunned if Jerome Baker gets to play against his former team. And it was kind of telling to me, Nick, that he was not named a team captain this week like Connor Williams was. That kind of told me I don't think they're expecting that he is going to be playing in this game. So edge and your off-ball linebackers, those are the two positions that are the biggest question marks here in terms of uncertainty, with some guys that maybe the Seahawks were expecting to play that might not be able to in this football game.
Right, yeah. So this is an opportunity certainly for the guys under them. Obviously, Tyrese Knight, only 44 snaps so far this year. He's graded out pretty well in most categories. He actually got the second highest tackling grade on the team currently. If you kind of mess around with the minimum snaps number, coverage wise, not so much. So yes, he'll probably be if Mike McDonald and Mike McDaniel, man, that is going to be an interesting. If Mike McDaniel is certainly the talented and guru play caller that we kind of assume him to be, he probably will be targeting guys like Tyrese Knight in coverage and putting them in kind of conflict. So yes, and also in pass rushing, yes, the Dolphins don't have Tua. Skylar Thompson's in there, but that does not mean this Dolphins offense is not dangerous if the Seahawks cannot rush the passer. So you'd love to have as many horses in the stable there as you can. So we'll break this down. But yeah, you would hate to be down multiple of your top pass rushers, even against a backup quarterback.
When we come back, we're going to shift gears from injuries to the game plan, the guys that are going to be out there. How do the Seahawks beat the Miami Dolphins, the shorthanded Dolphins, but a well-coached Dolphins squad? How do the Seahawks move to 3-0 for the first time since 2020? We'll get to that on offense and defense coming up next here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because unlike other apps, Prize Picks is just you against the numbers. One Caleb Williams passing yard gets you one win on Prize Picks every week in September. That's right, only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free W's. Don't miss this deal on Prize Picks because it's gone when September ends. For week 3, I'm going to be projecting Zach Charbonnet to surpass 0.5 rushing, receiving combined touchdowns and Geno Smith to surpass 235 6.5 passing yards on Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's the code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined here on Blue Friday by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. And for your second listen, make sure to check out the new Locked On NFL. There's 2 shows every day. First, you get the madman Tyler Rowland kicking things off in the morning with a double shot of NFL Espresso, and then stop by the barber shop with our good friend Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the Locked On local experts, and you get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, and detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. Make it your second listen at YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Nick, the Seahawks are looking to get off to a 3-0 start for the first time since 2020, and this is not something that has happened a lot in Seahawks history. In fact, most of the Pete Carroll era, we know that they were better off at the end of the season. They usually started kind of slow and stumbled out of the gate. So this would be a rare opportunity to get to 3-0. The Seahawks are by themselves in first place in the NFC West, and you want to keep everybody else in trail. So this is certainly an important game. And anytime you get to play a team that's missing their starting quarterback, we know that has been a curse in the past for the Seattle Seahawks. But these are games that you have got to have, because if you lose this one, this is a gimme that is no longer going to be in your front pocket. If you end up missing a division championship by 1 game, you are going to be kicking yourself, or missing the playoffs for that matter. You're going to be kicking yourself. So looking at this game and what the Seahawks need to do, let's start with the Seahawks on the offensive side of the football, going against a Dolphins team that's actually 24th right now in points against, but there's a lot of good statistics for this defense as well in the first 2 weeks. How are you attacking the Miami Dolphins on Sunday?
Well, they have had, limited success, to put it lightly, in rushing the passer. So with that, you're going to have some time downfield. Now, you don't need to be stupid with, DK Metcalf versus Jalen Ramsey. If it's not there, it's not there. But pick your spots in the pass game. Take those shots, because with that limited pass rush, you can get Tyler Lockett downfield. Tyler Lockett's got 11.5 yards per catch right now. He's got a good average there. Even Jackson Smith and Jigba, who, maybe last year was a bit of a, slot, mesh merchant. Most of that obviously was Shane Waldron's scheme. He can absolutely hurt you downfield too. So taking those shots, pick your spots. Don't be stupid with it. With Jalen Ramsey, a very, very, still a top 5 corner, I think, in the league. But, pick your spots, because you will get them, especially if the Dolphins continue to fail to get home and pass rush. Taking those shots downfield should be effective.
Yeah, and the Dolphins are the 6th worst team in the league right now for explosive play rate allowed, 12.5%. And again, it's a small sample size, but they have given up some big plays in the passing game, and it could have been worse. Jalen Ramsey got beat bad last week and ended up drawing a defensive pass interference penalty to prevent a touchdown. And if that play would have counted, then we're looking at a much higher yards per catch allowed. The Dolphins are actually near the bottom of the league for receiving yards that are given up to receivers. They have given up just 15 receptions to wide receivers, but there have been some big plays that have been in there. So this is not a team that you're just going to be dropping back and throwing it deep every single time, but you can pick your shots. With that being said, we talked about this on Wednesday's matchup show. Miami has had some big losses in the interior on their defensive line. Calais Campbell is still a good player, but he's 38. He's not a guy that's going to be able to play 75% of the snaps. And there's some serious question marks for the rest of that defensive line. And James Cook, the former Georgia running back, had some big runs against Miami last week for Buffalo. Oh, by the way, the Seahawks have a Georgia running back on their roster. And I know Kenny McIntosh didn't run a 4.4. He was in the 4.6s. He is not the same level of athlete that James Cook is, but I think he can run with a little bit more behind his pads. And there's a lot of similarity in their running styles, both coming from Georgia. They both have that slasher ability. They both can do damage out of the backfield as pass catchers. We only got to see Kenny McIntosh play one offensive snap last week. I want to see a little bit more of a by committee approach with him and Zach Charbonnet against this Dolphins team, because I feel like that slashing style of Kenny McIntosh, we saw what James Cook could do last week. Kenny McIntosh has a lot of those same traits. I could see him being successful against this Dolphins team, especially considering they've had some issues defending running backs out of the backfield in the passing game too. So mix and match your running backs. That, to me, is going to open up this offense a little bit with the struggles they had. And I think it could help Charbonnet out, too, if the Dolphins are having to worry about a different style running back in a pairing rather than him getting 95% of the reps.
Yeah, and just to loop in my last 2 points here. So Kader Kohu, their slot corner for the Dolphins, out of 178 defensive backs per Pro Football Focus, he ranks 178th. Yes, dead last in coverage grade. And he's the slot guy. He allowed 2 20-plus yard receptions to the Jags in week 1. So take advantage of him. And that also kind of leads to the fourth point, is stay in attack mode in the red zone. Don't go into a turtle shell and bang your head against the wall in the run game if it's not working. I thought, again, they did a great job of that, of not doing that against New England when things weren't working. Don't go into a shell and go conservative when you get in the red zone, because the Dolphins are 30th in the league in red zone defense right now. Use this passing game. Use DK Metcalf in that physicality he has. Use Noah Fant, heaven forbid. Get JSN in space. Use Tyler Lockett toe tapping in the back of the end zone. Stay in attack mode, and even stay in attack mode in the passing game in the red zone, especially with a slot corner that is struggling like Kader Kohu. I keep wanting to say Coho like the salmon, but it's Kohu. And stay attacking him in the slot. Maybe mix up some matchups in the slot to get him in a position of conflict. And then also, especially in the red zone, you don't need to bang your head against the wall in the run game in the red zone. You are allowed to pass in the red zone for success and be aggressive there.
Yeah, and I think you also have to look at the other cornerback on the outside. Kendall Fuller, former first-round pick, has not had the same success the last few years. I mean, he has bounced around with multiple teams. He's been playing musical chairs since early in his career, when this guy was at one point a Pro Bowl corner, and he's still a decent starter, but it feels like there are a couple of matchups there. And even Jalen Ramsey going up against DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf has had plenty of success against him in the past. So this is one of those games where it does feel like there's going to be opportunities for those shots. And when they get in the red zone, don't be afraid to attack this secondary. Even the safeties. Jordan Poyer has had kind of a rough start to his career in Miami in coverage. This team has some warts in coverage. So absolutely the Seahawks can take advantage of it. But I do feel like they're going to have some semblance of a run game in order to be able to maximize their ability to be able to attack downfield against this secondary for Miami. Now let's shift gears now to the defensive side. And we mentioned the injuries earlier at the edge position. Boye Mafe and Derek Hall both being questionable. Uchenna Nwosu is going to be out for a third straight game. It looks like Mafe is going to play. If I had to predict now, Hall, it truly is a game time decision. So I have no idea if he's going to play in this game. But you're hoping you have both those guys. But regardless of who suits up, Skylar Thompson, if you watched him at Kansas State, Nick, which I know you watch a lot of college football, when he was the quarterback at Kansas State, they ran a lot of option football. He ran the ball a lot. He's a totally different style quarterback from Tua Tagovailoa. You have got to be able to have disciplined pass rushing lanes. Last week against Jacoby Brissett, they got upfield too far, way too many times. If you do that against Skylar Thompson, he is going to tuck, he's going to run, and he is going to pick up big chunks of yardage. So there needs to be aggressive yet disciplined pass rushing lanes against this particular quarterback, forcing him to beat you from the pocket, and don't give him outlets and creases where he can take off and run, because that would be playing to the strengths in his football game.
Yeah, if you want to let a backup quarterback hang around in this game, you get out of your rushing lanes, and all of a sudden a 3rd and 9 turns into a 16-yard scramble for a first down. Because he's going to be looking for any opportunity to create with his legs. If he has green grass, I mean, he's not going to be as, pristine and quick with his reads as Tua was. So if you give him any sort of outlet to run for first down, he's going to take it. So be smart there. And Devon Achane is a weapon for the Dolphins, and he actually has 14 targets and 14 receptions 14 receptions on 14 targets out of the backfield, and actually leads all running backs in forced missed tackles in the passing game. He is a weapon in the passing game as he is in the run game. Contain him, especially in the passing game. Don't let him sneak out. And again, that 3rd and 9, don't let him sneak out in the swing or underneath. All of a sudden, a catch, 2 yards in front of the line of scrimmage turns into a 12-yard gain. You can't do that because, again, the Seahawks on paper should win this game with a backup quarterback on the other sideline. But ways that you let them stay in the game, let Skylar Thompson scramble, let him have that outlet with Devon Achane, because if those things start rolling, it's going to be a tough day certainly to separate from the Dolphins, but a tough day. You don't want to let this game be tied or close late in the 4th quarter because that can bounce either way. You'd like to take control of this game, especially with the backup quarterback. You can't give them opportunities to stay in it.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the running back out of the backfield, when you discuss Achane's ability, the speed is really the biggest issue because you're talking about a legitimate 4.3 guy that when he gets in space, he can turn the jets on in an instant. If you let him loose on a wheel route, and again, that's why we're talking about Tyrese Knight. Like, this is not Ramondre Stevenson in coverage. Ramondre Stevenson's a good running back, but he is not going to be a guy that's running away from people in a route. He's not going to be somebody that you can beat defenders with deep. But this is a guy in Achane who absolutely can do that with his speed and his burst. He gets to the second level. He can go the distance just like he can out of the backfield. So that is definitely important. When I look at this game, and look, Nick, I love watching film as much as anybody. I break down all 22 just for fun on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. I probably watch every game 4 or 5 times through. And, maybe you can call me a nerd. But I've watched a ton of Mike McDonald tapes since the Seahawks hired him. And I can't remember ever seeing a game until last weekend where he didn't run at least a handful of simulated pressures. I didn't count one last week. It was as vanilla of a defensive game plan as I've seen. I think some of it was because of the Patriots game plan and trying to protect against run. But in this game with a backup quarterback in Skylar Thompson, who has not started a game since the playoffs in 2 seasons ago, I believe it was January 2023. He has not started a game since then. He's only started 2 games in his entire career. He hasn't had a lot of looks. You need to find ways to get him on his heels and confuse him. And I'm not saying open up your entire playbook for a backup quarterback. You're not going to do that. But open up the sim pressure cookbook, baby. I want to see some sting. I want to see a number of different fire zones, especially if you're going to be missing Mafe and or Hall in this football game. You're going to need to find ways to create pressure. So sick Devin Witherspoon after him. Send Julian Love, Rayshawn Jenkins, Tyrese Knight. Let the rookie in on the action. Find some ways to send extra pressure, or at least perceived extra pressure. You can drop some of your guys in the defensive line back into zone. Mike McDonald made a living doing that in Baltimore. I want to see a little bit more of that this week just for the sake of mixing up your looks and making it tough on Skylar Thompson with the noise and with being unable to read what the Seahawks are doing defensively.
And this kind of all wraps up, too, into the final point of limiting, the yak in the short intermediate game, because Tyreek Hill is like the yak king, of course, 4th in the NFL last year in yak. And then Devon Achane, like I said, actually currently leads the team in yards after catch. And then you've got Jalen Waddle and Jonnu Smith, who we've hardly really talked about. Also is a dangerous tight end. He's one of the more targeted tight ends right now, I think, in the NFL, if you just look at pure targets. So he's dangerous. And like I've said before, you can't let the 3rd and 9s turn into what could be a 2-yard completion underneath. All of a sudden they're slipping through and miss a couple missed tackles and it's first down. You can't do that against this team because Mike McDaniel's a fantastic play caller. They get into a rhythm with him. That's going to be really hard to stop. And B, a backup quarterback, a bit against the wall, you let them hang around and find a rhythm. Any NFL quarterback, backup or not, with the weapons he has, if they get into a rhythm and you fail to tackle, that's going to spell trouble, especially late in the game when you're trying to put it away, when you should be winning this game.
When we come back, we're going to continue our final preview for Sunday's matchup between the Seahawks and the Dolphins. We got our weekly picks to click, and then we've also got our game predictions. Are the Seahawks moving to 3-0, or are the Dolphins feeling upset with a backup quarterback? We'll get to that up next here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. FanDuel, we've talked about them a lot on this show, America's #1 sports book. We have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. With a YouTube TV-based plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Bet on everything from DK Metcalf scoring a touchdown against the Dolphins at plus 155, or Jackson Smith-Njigba being the first player with a 30-plus yard reception at plus 300. Just throw in a $5 bet, and you'll get a 3-week free trial to NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host, Nick Lee, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate your support. The Seahawks will be looking to go to 3-0 for the first time since 2020 when the Dolphins fly all the way from Miami out to the Pacific Northwest. It is the longest mainland trip for an NFL team to make. It's usually harder on the team on the West Coast, but this is still a long flight, some jet lag potential, and the Dolphins are coming into this game banged up, especially with backup quarterback Skylar Thompson set to replace Tua Tagovailoa, who is now an injured reserve due to his latest concussion. Let's get to our weekly picks to click, the players that we expect big games from the Seahawks on Sunday. And Nick, I feel like for the most part, you and I have been rolling on these picks to click really since the preseason. I made the mistake of going with Noah Fant last week, which he had more drops than catches. So that's just always how it goes. I need to stop picking him as a pick to click. And when I don't pick him, he seems to have big games. So maybe I need to work in the jinx mode here and just not pick him anymore. But got some great production from Boye Mafe off the edge on defense. I know that your picks to click also worked out pretty well last week. Who do you have on offense coming through with a big game for the Seahawks this week as your pick to click?
Well, speaking of jinxes, I would really hate to jinx this man because he's kind of a bit on a streak right now. And that is, yes, I'm going with an offensive lineman. Left tackle Charles Cross is my pick to click for 3 catches and 80 yards. No, I'm just kidding. Just how he's been playing this year. I mean, he's been kind of out of body almost. And with the Dolphins, 28th in pressure rate, 31st in total pressures, they're not getting to the quarterback very well. They're not pressuring the offensive line as good as other teams. I'm going to say that Charles Cross gets a 3rd straight clean game, and that means 0 sacks allowed. In fact, he's the only tackle with at least 80 pass blocking snaps that hasn't even allowed a pressure yet. And he is currently the #1 graded Pro Football Focus tackle in football. He is on an all-pro trajectory. I would hate to jinx him with this because he is on that streak of 0 pressures allowed. But I've just been so impressed, especially with some of the other issues along the offensive line. He has been, as we've discussed on the website and things like that throughout this week, an anchor. He has been an anchor along this offensive line and truly putting himself on the map in year 3 here. So I'm going to go Charles Cross to have another really solid game at left tackle.
I'm hoping for better success with my selection than I had a couple weeks ago because this is the second time this year that I have picked Jackson Smith-Njigba. I have been great on defense with picking players. Offense has been a rough start for me. I wish Jackson Smith-Njigba would have been my pick last week when he went out and had 1 million catches against the New England Patriots. But I think this is another game. That was really, to me, the one that is going to get the ball rolling for Jackson Smith-Njigba. I think he's going to week in, week out, be a guy that gets a ton of targets, and he is going to gobble up a lot of catches. And I just love this matchup against the Miami Dolphins. We talked about Kohu, their corner, the slot corner out of Texas A&M Commerce, a small school guy. He has the worst grade on PFF for slot corner so far. He's been picked on a lot. He's a smaller guy that isn't necessarily – he's fast, but he isn't the quickest slot corner that you're going to see. It just feels like a matchup that Jackson Smith-Njigba can exploit. I think JSN is going to get double-digit catches again this week. I think Geno Smith is going to be looking for him early and often. I think they're going to attack the middle of the field. They're going to pick a little bit on the linebackers, David Long and a familiar name, Jordan Brooks. I think that Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to have a monster game. Maybe not quite the same numbers he had last week, but I will not be stunned if he goes double-digit catches and over 100 receiving yards again. I just like this matchup for him, especially if Jalen Ramsey's holding his own against DK Metcalf. There's just going to be more opportunities to get the ball to JSN. Now, on the defensive side of the football, who are you rolling this week against Skylar Thompson and the Dolphins?
Well, I mentioned the linebackers earlier in the show, and Terrell Dodson has been very impressive. The two linebackers there, I really hate that Baker's probably going to miss this game. Right now, Dodson is 6th among all linebackers in coverage. I know, yes, there is a linebacker in Seattle that is really good in coverage right now. That is, I know, a foreign concept to Seattleites, like an 80-degree day in January or something like that. He's been great in coverage. He's also tied for 11th among all linebackers in stops, which is, a tackle made that institutes kind of a failure for the offense per Pro Football Focus. So he's been very effective, and especially with the absence of Jerome Baker, he's going to have to step up, and I think he will. He's up to the challenge. He's a very athletic sideline-to-sideline linebacker. I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. I think he maybe even takes it to the next level against a talented offense.
I mentioned the sim pressures earlier, and that's part of the reason that I'm picking Devin Witherspoon in this game. We've already seen him blitz a fair amount, but I would like to see the Seahawks, rather than just having your straight-up 5-6 rush blitzes, send Devin Witherspoon when dropping somebody back. Mix in some of those sim pressures. Move him around the field. Skylar Thompson, again, he's making his 3rd start. So, I mean, he's played a little bit of NFL football, but this is not a guy that has a lot of reps in the regular season. The last start he had, he went 18 for 45, albeit in the playoffs against the Buffalo Bills. But this is a young quarterback that is not tested. And Devin Witherspoon, this is a game that he should be licking his chops. Mike McDonald, I'm going to mix up the coaches too. Mike McDonald is going to be licking his chops for that possibility too, to sick Devin Witherspoon after Skylar Thompson. And I think this is a game where he gets his first sack of the season, and I think he's going to get an interception too. I think it's going to be one of those breakout games this season for Devin Witherspoon, taking advantage of a rookie quarterback. He's going to break the backup QB curse. I think Devin Witherspoon is going to be a big part of that in this football game, and I think they're going to be featuring him, moving him all over the place and doing a lot of fun stuff against this Miami Dolphins offense. Now, let's get to the game predictions. And I will admit, this is always a tricky one for me when I'm making predictions because we haven't seen much of Skylar Thompson. We know Miami's still got some weapons. Not having Raheem Mostert, I think, is a fairly big deal, even with Achane in the backfield. That's another really good player the Seahawks will not have to worry about this week that has a good track record against the Seahawks dating back to his time in San Francisco. Mike McDaniel is as good at scheming stuff up as anybody. So for me, as I'll explain here in a moment, there's maybe a little hesitation in terms of how to look at what this game is going to ultimately play out like. But I want to first hear what you have to say. Who's winning this football game? Do you see the Seahawks? Do you see the Dolphins coming in with the upset out of nowhere, the backup quarterback, continuing that ugly trend that Colt McCoy and Andy Dalton have been running for years? What do you think is going to happen, good sir?
Well, first of all, I'm really excited to see the Mike McDaniel versus Ryan Grubb matchup, which is the two offensive minds going at it. That's going to be really exciting.
And they have different names, so we don't have to mix them up.
Yes, the Mike McDaniel versus Mike McDonald, I'm not even going to touch that anymore, which also is a very exciting matchup. But I do see this as a bit sloppy and sloggy at first because that seems like this the Seahawks' MO right now. And I'll give Mike McDaniel credit. I do think that they're going to get some chunks of flesh. He's had all week to prep for having Skylar Thompson at quarterback. I do think there'll be some wrinkles in there. He's a fine play caller. I think they'll get some there. As long as the Seahawks limit it. I do see this being an ultimate for the Seahawks defense, a bend don't break. I see this as the ultimate maybe field goal fest for the Dolphins. And I'm seeing the Seahawks maybe have control late, 24-13, and then the Dolphins kind of get a weird drive down late, kick a field goal to make it within 8 points. Maybe a nervous onside kick play that the Seahawks recover to win. I'm going to go Seahawks 24, Dolphins 16, a one-score win. But a little sloppy, a little sloggy, but backup quarterback weirdness. But I do think the Seahawks come out on top by 8.
I've been going back and forth on this because to me, this could be a trap game just because Mike McDaniel is such a great play caller. You've still got to deal with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devin Achane. You got to deal with plenty of their weapons. But I think this is going to be one of those classic, what I like to call snowball games. And How it's going to play out is it is going to be a brutal slugfest early. Both teams are going to be punching each other in the face. There's going to be some miscues. It's going to be kept close. But as that snowball starts to get downhill, I just think talent in the end, that snowball is going to pick up speed, and the Seahawks are going to create separation in the second half. I just think the Geno Smith versus Skylar Thompson is going to be too wide of a gap for the Dolphins to overcome. I think this Seahawks defense is better than the ones we've watched, a lot better than we've watched the last few years where backups have come in and lit their secondary up. I do not see Mike McDonald allowing that to happen. I don't think Devin Witherspoon and Rick Woolen are going to let that happen. They are viewing this as a great test against Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and I think they're going to rise to the occasion. So I'm going to go 30-13, and I don't want people to think that this is one of those games where Seattle just knocks the Dolphins out early. Again, I view this as a snowball game that ends up looking like a blowout when a good chunk of the game was competitive. I just think that the Seahawks are going to have a few too many pieces on offense and defense for Miami to be able to overcome the loss of Tua Tagovailoa and even Raheem Mostert in the backfield, who was a 1,000-yard rusher and has good receiving skills himself. They've got a lot of turnover on defense. I just think that the Seahawks are better equipped in this game on all three phases, and it is eventually going to play out that way. And Seattle is going to have a 30-point game at some point. I think it is going to be this game. But we shall see when the two teams take the field on Sunday. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at NickLee51. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Make sure to tune in on Sunday. Connor Benintendi will be joining me a few hours after the game. Hopefully another Seahawks victory. We'll be diving into our game balls, 3 up, 3 down, key storylines, and much more. Enjoy your weekend and enjoy the game. Go Hawks.